I just want to say welcome to everyone, and we are on to our second panel for the day. And I want to say that the panel before, with the examples from Jamaica, Barbados, and Dominica were exceptional in setting up what is really the nexus of this entire discussion. And then, of course, moving on to the other panels where this becomes the feeder to some of the other panels going on. I'm really enjoying the discussion so far, and I want to frame the discussion that we're having now around a principle, one principle and one observation. So the one principle I want us to focus on as we go through the governance discussion of this particular topic is the principle of universality. And I think the Jamaica discussion set that up really nicely. And that is when we're talking about digital financial services, when we're talking about electronic commerce and so on, we have to be able to talk about the universal access, the financial inclusion aspect, and so on. So that's the principle under which we want to discuss this topic. And I have with me the pleasure of having two very important panelists here. We have Ms. Vashti Maharaj. She's the Director of Legal Services in the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs in Trinidad and Tobago, and Mr. Charles Bobb-Semple. He's the Deputy CEO of iGovTT. Welcome to you both. So continuing on for our objective. So our objective here on this discussion is to talk about some of the innovations, observations, and imperatives that are required as we move forward to the next stage of accelerating electronic commerce in the region. And I want to steal something that Yasin said yesterday, or the title of his presentation, which was Meaningful Internet. So let's talk about this around the context of meaningful acceleration of electronic commerce, e-payments, e-money, and online transactions, and so on. So the second pillar that I want to discuss here is this whole pillar of shocks. And if we look at the Caribbean, our greatest innovations come out of our greatest shocks. And I'm really, really pleased to see the acceleration of many of these exercises and initiatives over the last few years. And that is of no surprise. In this particular area in economic transactions and electronic payments, this really started 10 years ago. This is the 10th anniversary of the Haiti earthquake. So if we take a look at just a very, very largely successful launch in Haiti on Chocho Mobile, now turned Moncash by Digicel, we can see that out of that very major shock came a very successful launch and an active player. It remains our longest mobile player or digital money player in the region right now, quite successful. And subsequent to that, the interest around digital payments and e-commerce really started. And over the last 5 years, we've had several starts and several stops. I think the greatest incubator of many of our mobile services actually came out of Jamaica, and many of our failures. And I will use the word failures loosely because I think out of those failures came many, many learnings. Certainly those learnings that have been incorporated in some of the observations that were displayed in the presentation earlier. So Hurricane Irma and Maria, of course, platformed us into a level of urgency. And with that urgency came some toying with the ability to use electronic payments for certainly things like cash benefit transfers and so on. And certainly Hurricane Dorian was a very big eye-opener. The acceleration went even faster. And of course, when we talk about the kinds of shocks that we experience now, there is no disputing that the shock or the exogenous shock being faced by the region right now is one of such significance that there was no longer a sequential view to playing around with some of these services. There had to be a very focused, very accelerated, and to use Rodney's term in the last panel, a very iterative view on how we take on this subject. Because no one is looking for perfection. We are looking for survivability right now. But over the last 5 years, there's been a lot happening. And at my last count, I had reached around $300 million being pumped in the region through various funds and donor agencies and different agendas. And that's an impressive amount. And in the last 6 months of this exercise, we can see that there has been a far greater acceleration and trial and mobilization of efforts in this area. And I just want to highlight a few of those because I think it's important to identify and acknowledge some of the stuff that's actually going on. If I forget any of the platforms, please excuse me. I mean, I don't have an exhaustive list, but I mean, there's a lot going on. So in Jamaica, the CARE program is exceptional in the area of cash transfer systems for the economic stimulus. We Pay, that was birthed out of Trinidad, did actually have a couple of interesting sectoral interventions over the last few months. One in Jamaica as well, participating in the first cashless farmers markets in Jamaica, where even during COVID, people were able to continue the economy per se, and be able to sustain agricultural and food security livelihoods. We Pay as well piloted their cashless initiative by providing digital grants to remote areas in Trinidad where, again, in the spirit of universality and financial inclusion for those excluded, there needed to be a way to be able to find an immediate way to reach these populations. Rodney spoke about M-Money in Barbados, some excellent initiatives to be able to quickly deliver essential products, pharmaceuticals, and so on to customers and businesses. And I know that there are additional steps being taken with M-Money and Barbados to be able to further those exercises and initiatives. And then, of course, inside of Barbados, we're talking BIT. BIT has been around for a while, and their very interesting pivot in 2019 was actually pivotal to setting up some of those elements of the central bank digital currency or the digital fiat that has been pervading across the region. I think 4 or 5 central banks have signed MOUs to be able to pilot a central bank digital currency. One of the ones that I'm closest to, of course, is the ECCB. And the ECCB's D-Cash, if you will, or the digital Eastern Caribbean dollar, is right now in pilot phase in Antigua, St. Kitts, St. Lucia, and Grenada. And of course, if we think about the spirit of universality, again, their aim and their objective is to be able to reduce the use of cash by 50% in 5 years. Now, that is an aggressive target, but there is also the understanding that cash will not go away, but there is a strong notion that we must be able to move the informal cash-based economy into the formal financial economy in some way. And so being able to, I'm very interested in seeing how that plays out. The pilot is going on now. And many of those learnings, just like those learnings over the last few years, will feed into some of the exercises that will be to come. And so what I would like to do now, as we go into some of those, I just gave some small snippets, small examples. I'd like to now move on to a deeper presentation. Let's go on to Vashti. Vashti is going to talk a little, set this up on the payments as well as the online transaction side of it. And then we'll move into Charles's presentation, and he will go lead into some of the more, important implementation guidelines and learnings that have happened in the jurisdiction. Vashti?
Hello. Hi, Rhea. Thank you. I think your IT team needs to allow me to start my video. Okay, there you go. Hi, good morning. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for putting it into square context within the Caribbean. I'd like to share our views from a Trinidad perspective and how it integrates in some of the things that we have learned and share to our colleagues across the Caribbean with regard to e-commerce and e-payments, which we've just piloted. So let's go. So within the Caribbean context, you would find that Caribbean people spend an average of 4.3 active hours trying to get one single government transaction done. And that's on average across the region. In fact, in some countries, you might have to take a day off to go to the passport office. Very few transactions in the Caribbean can in fact be carried in just one visit. In fact, in most countries, 45% of the time within the Caribbean, for example, Barbados and Jamaica, you're going to have to make at least 3 trips in order to complete your one transaction, whatever it may be. Most government transactions are also not available online. In fact, only 8% of persons across the Caribbean region have been able to access most of their services online. And this is largely taken from a recent IDB report that is quite helpful from December 2019 called Wait No More, Citizen Red Tape and Digital Government, in terms of its analysis of some of the contingencies we face across the region. And where you put it into very good context just now with regard to the advent of COVID. Because many countries have had curfews, lockdowns, restricted movements, and this would have impacted on the ability for persons to conduct transactions. But what has compounded that is that when businesses and governments even try to move online, there are gaps in digital access and processes, which would even limit the people who are able to access the services. So I put it into context, and I'd like to share what we have done in Trinidad in terms of piloting online payments and some of the lessons that we've learned that we can share across the region. So from a national macroeconomic perspective, the government of Trinidad and Tobago in its national developmental strategy in Vision 2030, we have clearly articulated that when it comes to electronic commerce and electronic payments, it is a priority because it is one of the factors that will drive greater public transparency and accountability. And it is also one of the critical components in ensuring that there's transparency within the government. This is dovetailed with our national ICT blueprint or national digital plan, in which the government will undertake initiatives to address digital financial services in addition to e-transactions and e-payments. So our ministry, the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, has piloted electronic payments, and it's a process that would have taken a lot of years because it involves taking what you traditionally know and try to change that, the entire business process from beginning to end. And let me tell you something, the government cleaves to people. More than anything else, paper makes them happy and comfortable. So the way that we've approached it is that we have taken a four-pronged approach. Put in place the necessary plant and machinery. Ensure that there is sufficient change management and upskilling with regard to people. Ensure that you put in place the appropriate technology and solutions, and back it up and regularize it with a strong legislative backbone. And it's the first key lesson that I'd like to share with my colleagues across the region. The key driver to change and the key driver to the implementation of electronic commerce and electronic payments is having that drive from the very top. And in that regard, we've had the Honorable Attorney General, who has taken it upon himself to be that digital champion, because on mornings when you come to the ministry and you see people lined up outside and they will be there for many hours, it doesn't mean that you're popular. It means that there's an urgent need to re-engineer your processes. We've also had the fortunate disposition to have a very progressive and forward-thinking Registrar General, who has not only looked at getting best practice solutions, but has also had a very smart team who would have been continually doing their process reintegration and even developed in-house apps. And we have a dynamic and very, very, very enthusiastic intellectual property controller. But as you would have indicated, the greatest precipitator to change has been COVID. And I also have a permanent secretary who thinks that, you know, the greatest solution and excuse right now is COVID. And the time is now. So that being said, what we did is that we understood that even on a yearly basis in the Registrar General's department, you have over 140,000 transactions. And the IPO has patents, that continuous patent applications, and that would be amassing to 70% of their daily business. So without a digitized process, we had a daily situation where you have long lines to access services. People spend most of their day here. Everything had to be done in person. And the one thing that we had to also encounter is that it increases the incidence or the possibility for fraud to take place. In March of 2020, we launched the online end-to-end e-commerce with regard to all civil applications, births, deaths, marriages, adoptions, and also all applications under the Intellectual Property Office. You can now go online, pay for it, and in the case of the Registrar General's department, have it delivered directly to your door. It is also anticipated that very, very shortly, we're going to roll out the launch of the land registry as well as the company's registry of the Registrar General's department. The good thing about this is that we've been able to develop and strike effective partnerships. And one of those key partnerships was with the National Information Technology company called iGovTT. And I know that Charles is going to go into his very detailed technical process and presentation next. But iGovTT developed an app and a platform called GovPayTT. And not only has it been launched and has been very, very successful, but it's actually very scalable. And I'm sure he will speak to the different agencies that they're looking at integrating it with across the government, which I think is a very, very laudable exercise. And they have a very, very strong and dynamic development team. We've also partnered with our local bank, First Citizens Bank. And we have found that that strategic partnership, which was the other thing, and the other lesson that we have learned with regard to electronic commerce, is that it is not necessary to do it alone. Neither is it necessary to reinvent a wheel. Building strategic public-private sector partnerships are key if you actually want to effectively and successfully roll out electronic transactions and electronic payments. So in 1, 2, 3, I'd be able to simply go online and do my business, but it has resulted in greater convenience. As one of my colleagues in the Ministry of Public Administration, their permanent secretary, has indicated, their digital transformation drive is the only line that you should have is online. And when governments start to think like that, and you see that executive championing, it is a sign that, you know, it can trickle down to the way that we do business. There's a delivery of documents directly to your home. You accord dignity to citizens, because the truth about it is that the majority of persons who access a lot of governmental services are those who are not able to afford to have it done for them. And you find that those persons would have the least ability to take time away from work or take time away from their day or days in order to conduct business. There's a digitization of records, which is key because it allows for greater transparency and traceability and the ease of doing business, not just for the citizens who live in your country and the businesses that are based here, but the Caribbean has a large diaspora. Everybody in most countries in Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and the islands can tell you of some auntie or uncle that they have who live in the States or the UK or elsewhere. But those people also have essential businesses that they would like to conduct online, even down to their pensions. And for a lot of them, for a long time, they would actually have to come in person. But with the digitization of these processes, it actually allows more people to access services. And that forms part of not only electronic inclusion and universal access, but it also forms part of the loop that is digital inclusion. As well, with the Intellectual Property Office, not only have we been able to allow greater convenience, but you're able to inculcate greater best practice standards, because what we did is that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. The Intellectual Property Office has collaborated with the World Intellectual Property Office to utilize the WIPO file solution, which is scalable and integratable and used by many countries within Latin America and now Trinidad. There's greater transparency, and transactions are not only traceable, but they're easily retrievable and accessible. What we've done is backed up our processes with the necessary legislative infrastructure, because the truth about it is that, and this is one of those key and critical things that I'd like to point out as one of our lessons, when you digitize things, you open yourself up to new opportunities, but also new vulnerabilities. And the way to mitigate that, yes, is through appropriate information security and information security standards. And we have been doing our penetration and vulnerability testing with regard to systems. But there's a need for standardization and ensuring that you have set rules and regulatory regimes to back your systems up. So we have improved fraud prevention laws, follow the money legislation. We've undertaken a land reform package. And we have also, to ensure that everyone reads on the same book across the government, collaborated very closely with the Ministry of Finance Treasury Division to develop the financial instructions for public monies collected by a credit card. That means that every single department that now decides to go online and offer e-payments using the iGovTT solution that we've developed will be able to seamlessly integrate it into their systems, because you have the rules and guidelines that are in place. And I think one of the things that we are most grateful for, and it was very timely, as I've indicated, we had been working on this for well over a year. And it's a very intensive process, because you involve changing every single step of your manual-based process. But when we had to enter into a lockdown, it was absolutely timely that we were able to do so, because it allowed for the continuity of business services for our registry during COVID-19, and therefore people would still be able to access their essential services. So what are our takeaways, and one of the things that we suggest in terms of the way forward? It has been tremendously successful, and we've worked seamlessly with our partners to ensure that it's even scalable. So to date, we have had over 7,000 civil applications at the Registrar General's Department and over 117 applications at the Intellectual Property Office. And as we experience the uptake, or the greater uptake, and get feedback, the one thing we're able to do is further integrate or further expand our services based on the needs and requirements of our actual customer base, which is very important. And not only continuous integration and feedback, but continuous expansion and upgrading of your system. There has been capacity building through change management. And the fact of the matter is that more and more, as we move towards greater digital inclusion and access, you'd find that there is more and more need to upskill and train your departments. And the government, I can tell you, there are many, many dedicated persons in there, and they are not averse to change. And it is one of the integral things that we have done that allows them to not only happily embrace it. People are not seeing digitization as a way to take your job, as a way to take you out of the business process, but as a way to allow you to do your job even better. And that is the mindset that we try to put forward and integrate within the organization. And it is well worth thinking of. And scalability. It has been developed in such a way that the iGovTT platform can be integrated across different ministries, agencies, and departments. But you know, the one thing that we have to accept and embrace, and I laud the Caribbean Telecommunications considerably for this, is that there are many, many initiatives that put forward having a common base, because there are many synergies. For example, the Caribbean single ICT space or common government. Because even though we are different countries with different histories sometimes and different backgrounds, most of the Caribbean countries have a common law base. All of us have that really, really old Exchequer Act that we'll all have to change and upgrade. But technology is something that isn't specific to one country. It is scalable, it is shareable. And one of the things that we can do is share what works and also share lessons learned. And scalability is not just across the government, but can be done across the region. So I'm gonna stop here and give way to the chair and my other panelists, who I'm sure have a lot to add. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Vashti, for your very insightful comments. I very much enjoyed the comment that you made about people holding on to paper, and that is a reality, and also the intersection between digital transformation and business transformation, and the difference that the business process re-engineering comes first, and then the application of your digital platforms and channels must overlay on something that makes sense. I also like the idea of being able to consider, as we started off in the very beginning, the entire audience and understanding the limitations of both the internal and the external customer in framing the overall argument, as both of them play a very important role in the health and going forward of the ecosystem. So I thank you very much, Vashti. So we will move on now to Charles. Charles will give some more detail implementation, maybe metrics, models, and so on, and the experience of iGovTT. So welcome, and I yield to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. And Vashti, thanks very much for laying everything out so neatly. So I am Charles. I am with the National ICT Company. Just a brief history on the company. It was established in 2010 as the National ICT Company, and we are mandated to support the implementation of God's policy directives. We also manage and provide foundational services, and we support the implementation of services for God by providing technical advisory services and so on. And everything we do, including the example that Vashti would have shared with regard to GovPay-TT, everything we do, we promote the notion of a shared service delivery model. And so with that in mind is how we also created GovPay-TT. Now, when I looked at our e-government maturity level, I think it is at level 1 initial for most of the region, but we are different scales and moving along different parts on the line. But essentially, most of us are focusing on moving our services to an online consumption model for user convenience and cost savings. I looked at the e-government survey 2020. This was completed in July this year, and with particular attention to the e-government development index. The e-government development index consists of 3 categories. It consists of the online service index, it consists of the telecommunications infrastructure index, and the human capital index. In 2 categories, well, first of all, overall, the numbers improved. We are 7 out of 38 in the small island developing states, and our EGDI, it is 0.678. In the last report in 2018, it was 0.644. So there was some improvement. Of course, there's a lot more to be done. To note though, I observed there was a huge jump in human capital. We moved from approximately 0.5 to 0.7, around that. And in the telecommunication infrastructure, there was a huge jump where we moved from 0.57 and we moved up to 0.68. That was the largest jump. But a bit later on, I'm also going to focus on the online services, because actually in online services, we dropped a bit by 0.02. Is not huge, but it's still a movement in the wrong direction. And just to share with us all, in the online services, they're impacted by approximately 148 questions, and the questions surround existence of live support functionality, the existence of e-procurement, the existence of a national portal, the ability to apply, as Vashti would have shared just now, to apply for birth certificates online, and payment facilities. So I think something that would have happened positively for this new 2-year reporting period is when this reporting period would have closed, a lot of those things we would not have had in place. Now, we are faced with something that is a great impetus. It is very unfortunate. It is disastrous worldwide. As a matter of fact, the UN Secretary General mentioned that the COVID-19 pandemic is a public health emergency, an economic crisis, a social crisis, and a human crisis that is fast becoming a human rights crisis. When I looked at some of the global figures as of today, indeed, this is what is happening. more than 24 million confirmed cases. Sadly, more than 807,000 confirmed deaths, and it is throughout in 216 countries, areas, and territories. I also looked at some information from ILO, which is the International Labour Office, and they projected that, and this is initial projections, so this could be far worse. They projected that in the region, 9.9% of our working hours are expected to be lost. Further, that the equivalent of 1.5 million full-time jobs will be lost in our region. So we have a serious situation at hand, and I want to share with us some of the transformation imperatives. And essentially, I will briefly discuss 5 items, and then I will share some enablers and the eventual future desire of how our governments should be. So one of the things I want to share briefly is what we have done to enhance our foundational infrastructure, how we go about enterprise collaboration. I'm going to focus a bit on online case management. So the first 2 are things that would have happened or in the tail end of being in training. The online case management is a new tautology for us to be able to deploy with the thinking that we can get these benefits. Because remember, while we're speaking of e-payments, we cannot pay something if it is not available in a palatable format. So we're looking at ways where we can encourage ministries and so on to be able to, to deploy certain case management for consumption. The adoption of digital identifier, and we'll end with e-payments. So let me share GovNet. GovNet is our backbone, and we have had it for a while. It is indeed a privilege to share that all of the infrastructure has been refreshed as of June this year. And GovNet, of course, it will be directory services. It deals with all email, it deals with all internet, and it provides security around all of those things. The other things as well as co-location and so on. But it has been refreshed, and the format of GovNet is scalable. And as you want to grow, you can grow, and you want to shrink, you could shrink. So technically, it is a cloud type environment that we have locally for our backbone. In addition to that, we are on the cusp of closing an evaluation for infrastructure as a service. So for ministries, departments, agencies who would like to secure some more storage or computing power, we will have various agencies that they can use to so consume locally, right? Now, for the enterprise collaboration, this morning we have been shared with Microsoft Teams, so our email is managing GovNet, but we have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, and from that, we consume the benefits that are derived in Teams, and I believe while unfortunate, what the pandemic has done is accelerate our hunger and thirst to utilize these types of tools, because within these tools, we can share documents, not only share, but we can collaborate. We can all work together on one document. We can meet in certain groups, we can chat, and we can have social networking within Teams. Now, a next collaboration that we have, and most of us may be aware that we do have an enterprise portal, ttconnect.gov.tt, TT Connect is part of iGovTT. And through TT Connect, the government is able to interact with the citizens in several formats in the original incarnation. You have the portal, online portal, you have mobile, we have express buses, where the buses are technically capable buses to be able to conduct transactions. So in areas where connectivity may be a challenge, or we want to provide a certain service in certain areas, we have express buses that can provide such service. We also have kiosks, self-service kiosks, access centers where persons can walk in to do business. Of course, while we still have that functioning and adherent to all of the protocols with regard to the pandemic, ideally, you will want to move away from a brick and mortar type environment to fully virtual. And we are working on those things as well. And I will share with you all some of those things in a bit. Additionally, we have the capability, we have had that capability for a while, to communicate via email and also phone. Now, you will see on the screen TT Chat. Recently, we deployed a facility where persons can chat real time with live agents during working hours. So you need to find out something to conduct business in Trinidad and Tobago, or you need some form of information, you can chat with these live agents. And remember, I would have shared that the e-government development index is affected by the online services index. And one of the categories in online services is the ability to provide live support. So this live support is live support to citizens. In non-working hours, we have bots that take over. So the bots will respond to any request. How do I pay for this? Where can I access this service? So the bots have a repository of information that they will attempt to answer. If, however, the citizen is not happy with the response they got from the bot will create a ticket. And on the next working day, the live agents will contact the customer and address the ticket. Further, this month, we launched a chat facility. We extended the chat facility onto WhatsApp. So most of us, I don't really have the numbers of how many people in the region use WhatsApp, but I know it's a lot. And so we have the facility where persons can go to a WhatsApp chat and you interact with the agents. This part happened within the last 2 weeks. Chat translator, regardless of the language you speak, we can attend to your services. So if the person is fluent in Spanish and they're not good in English, or they're fluent in French or some other language, they interface with the live chat in the normal way. They select their language and they type in their language. The agent sees that chat in the language that they will understand, which is English, and their response will be communicated to the client in the language that they are accustomed with. It caters for just over 100 languages. So again, in terms of facilitating multiple languages, we are doing that. And EmployTT is an online recruitment system which will aid citizens to conveniently access job vacancies that different ministries may have, divisions or agencies that they may have. This was birthed in a hackathon that we hosted and invited tertiary institutions. There were 22 teams, each comprising of 5 hackleads. That is what we call them, hackleads. And at the end of it, there were 3 successful solutions. One was e-appointment, where you're able to make appointments with the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And we foresee that that will be launched and implemented in the month of October 2020. We also have an application that focuses on commute. So you're able to find the different routes to reach somewhere within Trinidad, but also the cost associated with the different options that will take. So it will have all of the transportation fees and so on embedded within it. And we have EmployTT. This makes applying for positions simple, quick, and it is traceable. That is on the side of the one who's applying. On the back end, with the ministries and so on, the ones who are consuming it to send forward in terms of their jobs, job availability, and so on. You know, if any of you would have had the experience of filtering applications, it can be a tedious task, especially if they are upward of 300. What the solution does, based on criteria that you would set, it filters all of those applications and furnishes it to you in ascending order by your desire. So essentially in milliseconds, you can now do something that you would have taken, in some cases, a couple of weeks. I would have mentioned the online case management. This is something we foresee that it will be very beneficial, especially for organizations that may not have an e-service. But what they do, it is important for them to keep detailed records about a particular incident. And you take all the records through a particular path. Essentially, you know, it's like an amped up workflow. So as an example of like 311 that would exist in Miami, you know, along those lines, you see a pothole, you report it. You can trace how your request is going through. We can do analytics on the data to see, okay, where can we improve more along this continuum? And it doesn't require the person going somewhere to report something. So social distancing, totally maintained, and it will be fully transparent and so on. So these are talks that we are engaging in at the moment, right? With the electronic identifier, we do have TT Connect ID, and but we also understand that there is a need for us to move to a national ID. So we now have to consider, do you move to an EID card? What about the discussion with biometrics? Those things are getting a lot of traction internationally. Then you also have the part with your EID, do we put in microprocessors? Because in some parts of the world, you don't need any bank cards either. Because of that, as Vashti would have mentioned, you have certain handshakes taking place so that you able to, with one card, transact essentially your business in public and private sector. Private sector in the form of banks, so you don't need bank cards. Now, while those things may be aware of, or may not, you know, we can't tell all the time, but we are now engaging in this discussion because we currently have the electronic identifier online. And so now we need to move forward with discussions, okay, where do we carry this in terms of being a national electronic identifier? And Vashti would have mentioned, and with the e-payments, GovPayTT is an online payment platform for government goods and services. It is key, and to harp on what Vashti would have mentioned, It is key to support in the ease of doing business. And of course, without saying, it aids with social distancing. We have deployed it at the Ministry of the Attorney General, and there is full fulfillment from start to end, from you going on your device, you pay, to it reaching your door. There's also a move where all of our debit cards are getting the chips within. So really and truly, once you are working with a card that has a chip, so credit card, debit card, once you have the possibility of transacting online, it applies to everyone who has a card, that is a debit card or a credit card. We are currently working with 4 ministries to continue with the implementation of e-payment. And as Vashti mentioned, it was so good that the Ministry of the Attorney General, together with Treasury and iGovTT, would have worked for some time in ensuring that what we do is scalable. It can be easily replicated in the form of the processes and so on that must be adhered to. Now, for enablers, and I'll start from the bottom because Vashti would have mentioned this part with regard to change management. I think change management, it may be one of the more challenging things for us because we may have been in a habit of paper, and sometimes changing is a bit difficult. So we have to have a lot of energy on change management. I would have mentioned what we're doing in GovNet and our cloud focusedness. Rather than owning metal, we're able to derive from cost benefits in shared platforms. IT governance. This is integral in everything that we do, in all spheres that we operate. All of our enterprise services are managed by a governance team. You have the change advisory board, you have the operations team, you have the external stakeholders, and all of that is managed by the stakeholder. And e-procurement, all of our procurement moving forward is done online, from the creation of the RFP to the award of contract. So evaluations, everything is done virtually. So what we are doing with regard to this application, because it is scalable, it is a shared service, we are reaching out to all the MDs to consume this. But I should have mentioned on the supporting items, such as the legislation, and we need policies in place with cybersecurity. There are policies, there were data governance and so on. They may be a bit dated because I think they're like 2016. So we are working with our line ministry, who is responsible for ICT, which is the Ministry of Public Administration and Digital Transformation, to be able to update these things. And my last slide here. I think the middle 2 items, the online and 24/7, I am hopeful that soon, and I guess I could throw out 5 years for conversation's sake, that these will be things of the past, that our e-services will be available online, and we should not have any concern about availability or accessibility, because we have all those things covered within secure platforms available 24/7 and managed by governance teams. Beyond that though, I think we need to move a step forward to predict what services Charles will want to consume, because I'm seeing Charles' pattern in transaction with the government. And that is where now we become intuitive, and rather than waiting for them to request a service, hey Charles, there may be this service that you're interested in, feel free to consume and we are here to assist. So ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much, and let us continue to be safe amidst the current pandemic. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Charles, for your very insightful presentation. I want to highlight a few things. Number one, this presentation could easily also have been incorporated into the first session, which now gives also a clear guideline on some of the very important initiatives happening at the government level. So along with Dominica representing the OECS, along with Barbados, along with Jamaica, Trinidad's expressions and initiatives can stand very nicely aside with those as well. Thank you very much. Your details around GovPay-TT as well. Thank you. And I want to make a plug for something that you said, but it was probably not expressly stated, I should say, and that's the issue around data. I have a special interest in it, and the fact that you were able to bring in the government's maturity level number one, and in addition to that, having an e-government survey to actually track the progress of your initiatives is exceedingly important. And I want to make that plug for all other, anyone attempting to do any part of the digital transformation process. I want to make a plug that if it cannot be measured, it cannot be managed. And so that should be formally incorporated into some of our plans, monitoring mechanisms, and more importantly, as learnings for all of the rest of us in the Caribbean as we grapple very, very similar issues. So thank you very much. And the last thing I enjoyed very much was the participation of the hackleads in the design of these solutions. And that just brings in the citizenry on a much more intimate level, as they are the center of the problem, if you will, on this, being at the middle of the problems that need to be overcome, and therefore in making sure that we can design solutions that are appropriate for those very citizens. So thank you very much for that. So I was going to ask Vashti to come on. Thank you very much, Vashti, for coming on, because we're going to have a conversation now. The idea now is to be able to sort of dissect some of these core issues. Some of you, both of you, alluded to certain things at different parts of your presentation, and certainly in the first presentation as well. But I'm going to be, I'll ask some specific streams of questions, and the first question is going to be around product design. So if we look at where we are in the region, there are some attendant risks and vulnerabilities that we have, which are understood and accepted by everyone. But if we understand that scale in this area, particularly in the area of payments, begins at 10 million people, then outside of Haiti, which is the Dominican Republic, we lack a tremendous amount of scale. The OECS being 600,000, Jamaica 2.5, Trinidad much less. And if you overlay that with the idea that we are at the very organic stage of digital payments, meaning the payment transactional part of it, if we begin to evolve our digital financial services to what the citizenry actually needs, then we will need to overlay savings and loans, microfinancing, insurance, and all of the other types of financial services that our citizens interact with and need to interact with as well. What is your perspective, either of you or both of you, on how we can actually step over some of our scale issues and vulnerabilities to be able to reach the broad range of transactional requirements that we need for the longer term? Anyone?
I can start, and Charles, I know that you have much that you would like to add to this. One of the things that we do across the government is that we tend to integrate and share information. And the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, through the Ministry of Finance, has actually launched within this year the National E-Money Policy. And it would have been the precursor to regulations with regard to e-money, looking at different types of digital payments. How does that apply to scalability and different forms of payment? Not only do we have online payments where you can go online with a credit card, Charles would have alluded to it, you now have the introduction of Visa debit. So a lot of people who could not afford to get a credit card once they get, and the banks are changing out the cards with the pin chip technology, they will now be able to use their regular debit savings card and be able to do a transaction online. But then that does not also include the people who don't go to the bank, the people who hide their money under their mattress or wherever in the kitchen, or because there's that lack of trust and confidence or sticking to traditional measures. And that is why one of the things that my Attorney General was very keen on in one of his very first questions is, I want them to be able to go and stand up at a lotto booth and be able to, or any other different avenue, and be able to pay of not just lotto booths, but even like using traditional methods like SurePay or other providers. So one of the things we had to consider, and Charles is going to go into further details with this, is that in developing the technology, you want to make sure that you can have multi-channel delivery with regard to payments, so that you address the widest cross-section of persons and they will be able to make payments or access government services and make payments for government services in any medium for which they feel most comfortable. And that would therefore cater to the banked as well as the unbanked in the attempt to factor in digital inclusion with bridging that digital divide. Charles?
Yeah, but I agree with you, Vashti. Essentially, you mentioned it clear there. Our take with the initial GovPTT, we focused on online transactions. And what we are doing now is continuing to build on that, because we know it will take care of not only credit card holders, but we knew that the bigger part is the debit card holders. We generally have a lot of debit card users. And because it is now being chipped, it means we can access online. We know there are facilities in place, as you mentioned, agencies that can be used to be able to address the unbanked. If, however, there is the need for us to look into how we can expand on GovPTT to also cater for that. That is something we can do, but it may add value in terms of what you mentioned there, partnering with existing institutions who have that reach and capability. You mentioned like the lotto booths, or it could be the TT post offices and so on, where there is an area that they can go into transact in cash format with government. So in terms of addressing the unbanked, I think that is one of the things we need to do. And there we also have the challenge with persons who may be so remote, they don't have access to any internet. So they may have a debit card, but they don't have access to any internet at all. So those are some other things, and I will take your lead, Rhea, in terms of if to speak on those items as yet, or I will just follow your lead with regard to that, because that is our next discussion in terms of the ones who are remote, and what is our vision and how we have been trying to address that gap.
So I'll just say that part of this discussion, and I think it sets it up for the next panel as well, so you don't have to go too deep, really is there are two issues. There's the unbanked, of course, and then there's the underbanked. But if you interlace that, the level of unbanked or underbanked, as it overlaps to the level of unconnectivity, lack of digital connectedness, there is a high correlation. And so I think where you may be going and where the next panel will probably be going is how are we able to apply the principles in an unconnected environment where we know that there is this direct correlation to be able to arrive at that inclusion, financial inclusion, and digital inclusion as well. So, so your point is noted. I'll go on to the next question now, and it actually, so both of you talked about it. It surrounds legislation and regulation. Of course, there are major gaps. There are major, I think Maurice set it up very nicely. There were gaps in identity legislation. There were stops and starts. Even though legislation was enacted in 2016, you called it obsolete, and very rightly so. So there are continuing efforts that need to be put in place to be able to help avoid those gaps in policy and regulation, but also be able to take into consideration emerging gaps that may have, of course, be not foreseen, that even in this environment is now front and center to us. Now, there are 3 countries that I'm aware of, Jamaica, Barbados, and to a new extent, the OECS, led by the ECCB, who are playing around very formally in regulatory sandboxing. My question is, what would you do to be able to accelerate some of these fintech developments or some of these regulatory and policy gaps and needs inside of a sandbox environment, but without the wait and see approach that is happening now as we live in a COVID environment, and more of a cohabitating, almost a symbiotic approach to regulation and policy? Anyone? Maybe Vashti, this is your baby to start, to kick off.
That would be true, right? Regulatory sandboxing, yes, Jamaica, I know Barbados and Trinidad to some degree because we are looking at it very closely. And as I've indicated, we have developed and improved our national e-money policy that contemplates broadening our horizon. And that is the first step towards putting in place the necessary regulations. But one of the things I could tell you, not just in regulatory sandbox and digital finance, but when you look at most ICT legislation and even legislation that you may develop with regard to digital payments in terms of regulations, one of the things that we know and understand and accept is that technology changes every single day. And you cannot legislate for every new technology. The one thing that we do when we're drafting technology legislation is do it in broad terms, using what you call a light touch approach, where you allow for market regulatory forces to also have an impact through voluntary codes or industry practice. But when it comes to technology legislation, you draft it so broadly that you cater for present contingencies or what you're trying to encourage and promote now, and it would be wide enough to encompass any future developments. Of course, you update regularly, and that's why many pieces of technology legislation now will have something called a mandatory review clause, that within the next 3 to 5 years, the minister shall undertake a review and make recommendations, so that you don't end up in 5 years, end up with completely antiquated law that needs to be superannuated. There's a mandatory updating clause that is put in there. Outside of that, the way that we deal with gaps and don't have to wait until we change the legislation is that it's a little bit of a trick. I know all of you all know about this old trick. You have your substantive legislation that outlines or tends to the mischief or supports the concept and principle within society that you're trying to promote. But then you put in the ability to make orders or to do regulations, so that every time that, for instance, you may want to change the way that you do things or change your recognition pattern with regard to certain providers, it does not mean you have to go back to Parliament and God forbid there's an election and there is no Parliament. It means that it is a simple process of doing the regulations, consulting the industry with regard to the regulations, and it's not a protracted process. An order is even simpler. And that is why most countries, a good analogy is with COVID, most countries, in order to have their curfews, it's done by order, but you will find that these orders can happen overnight. So you still reserve certain abilities to exercise certain powers so that you don't have to go back to the board, every single drawing board, every single time that you'd like to change. And it adds to the versatility of any degree of legislation that you develop, technology-wise. I don't know if you may have anything to add to that, Charles?
No, I'm good, Vashti. You are the expert there. I am good.
All right, thank you very much, Vashti. So I'll go on to my next question. And this is something that both of you spoke about quite a lot. And that talks about the public and private sector commitment or the stakeholder engagement that is required to push this thing along. The truth is, as you know, commitment is a very varying term. And I remember having a discussion once with a private sector entity whose agenda is, of course, to make money. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, with a very clear and explicit understanding that the financially excluded is just too expensive to attract. And so if we understand the principle of universality, then we understand that, of course, there has to be a broad commitment by public and private sector and important roles around commitment across the entire spectrum of development, of coordination, of legislation. I think, Charles, you highlighted, or rather Vashti highlighted the cross-border, remittance opportunity. There's multiple regulatory, policymakers, central banks, private sector, citizens as athletes, to be able to play a role in providing oversight, championing, to provide, regulatory boundaries and so on. I make that particularly, so I draft it particularly as a mouthful because it is a mouthful. How would you continue? And I want you to frame this now in the context of the Caribbean, because it's very important as we look at the single ICT space and the opportunity as is currently played out in the OECS, to be able to have these cross-border remittances, cross-border payments, cross-border opportunities, to be able to, again, accelerate the e-commerce opportunity. How would you consider approaching these stakeholders in your efforts? Anyone?
Well, I will piggyback on something that Mr. Selby Wilson would have asked. I know with the creation of the Caribbean Development Bank initiative, we were supposed to be able to have a way where we can facilitate these intra transactions and intra payments and remittance of settlement among Caribbean nations. I think, and I'm saying this because of the amount of work I saw it is in Trinidad just to get certain things moving. Sometimes it takes a while, right? And so I imagine on a Caribbean level, as we would have all experienced, sometimes it takes even longer. I think the establishment of any bodies like this, we need to be able to give them enough teeth and latitude to be able to effect change. Sometimes we set up committees but they're restricted. So one of the things is not just setting it up, but you would have mentioned earlier where we need to measure progress. And as we measure progress against milestones we're supposed to hit, okay, why we didn't hit that one? What do we need to do? Oh, we need a ministerial forum so that we can have a regional discussion. But again, it would require us as well, Rhea, to be like totally committed behind these things, right? Because they are challenging. Certain changes, you know, it's sometimes like it's molasses. You're encouraging to go uphill. And it can be painful, and sometimes we tend to feel, I'm not sure if, how long again, we have been trying at this for 5 years or 7 years and so on. But I think initiatives like that, we need to keep them alive and let them, they have a voice in terms of bringing it to the fore. And how can we be of assistance? So we will have champions. Vashti would have mentioned we have the AG who is a local champion. Our minister is a champion for technology. How about if we have all the champions in all the regions with ICT and payments together in one area, and the bodies like this able to present to them the progress they're making, some of the challenges we have in, and we formulate a way to overcome it. Will still be challenging, but I think those are some of the things that we need to do, because this one is a big one and is not really, and I know if we were working on e-payments for years and it only happened this year, I can only imagine something that is regional in nature.
Indeed. Vashti?
Charles, you're tapping into that inner CPL with that champion business, you know. What that is why you made me smile there. I agree wholeheartedly what Charles had indicated. You see, it is something that it's a very pertinent question, Rhea, because you know they refer to the Caribbean, a generation of Caribbean people as barrel children. And that was after the World War, and we still have, because of the diaspora, a large amount of persons who rely on remittances from external countries, and even like remittances between countries, because we do have a lot of intra-Caribbean migration for work and other reasons, more so because of CSME. Remember, we have skilled professionals that move in between countries. Rhea is in the OACS now. But, you know, as a result of which there has been then, and there is now, a continuous need to look at ways in which to facilitate cross-border remittances. And this is even more so in the wake of COVID and other natural disasters that occur in the Caribbean. In the case of Haiti, you would have referenced the hurricane, and the earthquake which would have initiated the use of the M-Wallet. So because of that, there are certain solutions that we can look at. As we are aware, most countries have their national banks, but the regional financial carriers within the Caribbean tend to have presences throughout the Caribbean. So you would have your RBL, you will have your Scotia, you will have your Republic. And what happens is that a lot of people tend to trust their national banks. And one of the things that we would try to encourage, therefore, is getting through public-private partnerships, the banks on board to facilitate that cross-border transactional value that you can simply go online. Do you know a fun fact? Not until I think within the last decade can you take your Republic Bank card or your Scotia card from Trinidad and go to an ATM in Scotiabank in the BVI or within the SVG, St. Vincent and Grenadines, and now it works. And that means that there's greater interconnectivity with regard to the banking system that will serve some people well. But what about those people who don't? There are other solutions that I think are up and coming and are very pertinent. A lot of people use the remittance carriers, and we do have local remittance carriers that are effectively used. And then there is the mobile wallets and digital wallets and the solutions that can be rolled across, because there are new providers that, you know, are tapping into the market because they see a captive demand for it. But the one challenge a lot of them will have is that once you fall under a remittance carrier or you try to operate a digital wallet, you now count as a financial institution under most central banks act. And then you have to go through a whole process. It can be very protracted and usually is very bureaucratic, and it tends to serve as a disincentive for a lot of people to enter the market. So one of the things that I'd recommend is having regulatory incentivization, whereby you have your government say, you know what, we understand the need for this in terms of cross-border fluidity, and we'd like to incentivize it, but in a sandboxing kind of way to ensure that you have the adequate protections in place. And I hope that addresses the issues that you have raised.
Yes, it does not in full, because you don't have the answer, and I'll be, we all don't collectively have the answer because the environment is changing. But I do want to point to so many of the, I'll call it the institutional banks, the ones here 150 years and so on, and the rationalization that has taken place over the many years. So you talk about every country having its national banking system, and that's actually the pivot ground that I believe we need to move into, to tap into that in a more collective regional fashion, because we cannot continue to rely on the large global institutional banks that have been here to be able to take our step forward. But again, that's not for you to answer. That is for us to answer collectively, to be able to make that case, financial and socioeconomic case as well. So I appreciate that perspective very much. Now we have 5 minutes left before the end of the session, and I just want to encourage, if there are any other questions that are coming to the fore, to please put them in the Q&A, and I'll be able to see that. But I do have one last very provocative question, if you will, and that is the area that again the head of an institutional regional financial player told me once that it will cost 12 times as much to financially educate the population, to be able to make aware these services, and to be able to allow them to accelerate and optimize usage on these services, than it is to actually put the infrastructure in place. And that seemed very large to me as a number. But when I began to think about it, and I looked at it from just purely a private sector standpoint, it actually costs a lot to be able to make people aware of a product that you're trying to sell, more than the price of the product itself. And this is one of those cases. So where in our strategies do you, are we considering in Trinidad or any of the other examples, the issue of awareness, of financial literacy efforts? And I will add a small twist to that: financial literacy efforts using the nuances, behaviors, and norms of the financially unbanked, which is very different from the financially banked, to be able to become aware, as well as to promote usage of these platforms. Trinidad and Tobago has a lot of initiatives. We just finished talking about online transactions in 3 other territories. Where is this on the spectrum, and how do we deal with it?
I can start, and Charles, you can finish. Rhea, you are absolutely correct. It will take, the expenditure is 12 times as much to educate than it is to invest in the actual infrastructure, I guess. And it's not just particular to technology, you know, it's particular to any commercial product. Actually, branding and uptake will take most of your budget. Ask Coca-Cola, for instance. But one of the things that there are 2 approaches that can be taken. Both of them can be effective. One is necessity breeds innovation. And COVID was a very good example of that. Even if you have to do business, you have to do social distancing. There are limits on the numbers of persons who can now conduct business in any organization. And then when you digitize it, they sometimes have no choices but to go online to get it done. So there's necessity breeds innovation. Because if it didn't occur and you launch electronic payments, there's still a possibility that you will still end up with lines outside of people who are going to have to line up to pay. And the second thing, so there's the soft touch, there is the hardline approach of necessity, and then there is the soft touch approach that involves change management. Now, people think that change management is particular to the inside of an organization, but you not only change your employees, but you also have to change the mindset of your customer base. And one of the ways, the greatest way that you could do this is by inspiring trust and confidence in your system. That is why a lot of old people, no matter online services and all these fancy things, they still go into the bank with their bank book because they need to see it written down in bold. It's because what they're traditionally accustomed to, and it is that when they see it, they know that it is there. But at the end of the day, the one sure, soft way to approach change management is by integrating citizen trust and confidence. And that is what will lead to an uptick with regard to greater use and integration. And of course, you are right, there is the education rule. But I'll tell you a very interesting trick about the education rule. You have to take it at every level. So there's education in terms of getting the new generation to embrace it because they are digital natives. So they will automatically gravitate towards what is easier, convenient. These children are born knowing how to swipe in real life. So they're easier crowd, but you want to take education on the different levels based on what is your product service offering and based on what is your target or what is your target customer base. And those would have been the 3 ways that we approach it. Yeah.
Yep, thank you. Charles, any perspective?
Yes, I think we need to also invest heavily in the communication of same, rather than we want to simply cut the ribbon and we leave the building to deteriorate. Sometimes that is a challenge, because sometimes we think we need to achieve so many things and so many new services, and we don't pay attention to, one, the maintenance, but secondly, the usage. Because we in this digital world now, I think we should channel most of our expenditure virtually. But so first of all, is to create a healthy line item for the marketing of the product continually. That is one part. But then if you market the product and persons come to use it, and we don't deliver the service that we intend, then we would have failed there. So we still need to maintain that, okay, service is online. It doesn't mean that when, say, for instance, it is a workflow in online case management. Okay, this is online, great. So it reaches me now, this person has to attend to it. Whatever, yes, I'll do this whenever I have time. You're also defeating the entire system from, because we haven't changed. We haven't really made the change to, as the ones who providing the service, to truly provide a good service. So I would say it's twofold. I would say, one, we need to really put this thing as a serious budget line item, rather than focusing only on cutting the ribbon, maintenance, and the marketing of it. But secondly, we need to ensure that when the citizens come to use something, that we exceed their expectations. So we may have told them, okay, this will take 2 days. Let's try to do it in a day and a half or 1 day. Because what happens area, I have observed, especially with like e-tax, I'll give you this example. The number of persons who keep saying, wow, this service was real good, is now because of their experience. You now have individuals marketing this for you by telling their colleagues, hey, I filed and I got my return in 3 weeks. What, serious? Let me try it as well. And so it begins to spark the fire. But if we market something and the service is, suboptimal, then we may be defeating ourselves. So I would say we go with a two-pronged approach, and we budget it, we focus on maintenance and the upkeep, but we also focus on service delivery and exceed expectations.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. That was actually a very good synopsis as you ended off there. I want to say thank you wholeheartedly, both of you. This was an excellent conversation from my point of view. I hope that the listening and live audience was found it equally as useful as I did. I want us to continue trying to accelerate in this area. The charge is to continue to do it in a very cohesive manner as much as possible. Because the environment demands it. And on that note, I want to say thank you again, and I want to send it right back over to the Master of Ceremonies.